In the 19th century, there were many contributions of the Gilded Age, two of many being urbanization and immigration. Urbanization, along with its many benefits, towed along some difficulties. For instance, the housing conditions were harsh due to the huge population increase. The U.S. government created poor houses, which allowed families to have a place to sleep at night, provided they perform heavy manual labor. Families were often split up in these poor houses. Men and women were separated. These living facilities were often riddled with disease due to the poor sanitation conditions, including lack of indoor plumbing. The uncomfortable living conditions were a way thought up by government officials to encourage people to find real work in their own homes. Many people also lived in tenements, which were low-rise apartments that had multiple people sharing one room. They were cramped, poorly lit, and lacked indoor plumbing. Along with tenements, factory workers would find shelter in buildings that housed dozens of people at a time, called slums. During the Industrial Revolution, disease ran rampant. Overcrowding and poor sanitation sparked illnesses, including smallpox, typhus, typhoid, tuberculosis, and cholera. Contributions to these fatal illnesses were the low standards of sanitation and the abundance of people. The working conditions were harsh. People worked long hours for minimal pay and often went home tired and sick. At this time, child labor ran rampant during the 1800s. The common work day was 10 to 14 hours a day. Many children worked at factories. At this point, it wasn't uncommon for little fingers or arms to be taken off by fast-moving machinery. The political aspect had a certain effect as well in urbanization. Tammany Hall was a political party formed in 1789 in opposition to the Federalist Party. During the Industrial Revolution, it became popular due to their willingness to help the poor. It wasn't all nice flowers and beautiful horizons. Tammany Hall was also known for suspected corruption levied against leaders like William Tweed. Although there were many negative effects, urbanization also contributed to the better. One of the major positive effects was new technology that was introduced, such as elevators, skyscrapers, street lighting, water, and sewage systems. And one of the most touching aspects of urbanization were the cultural benefits that included museums, parks, libraries, and schools to be established.
Urbanization vastly impacting the lifestyle of many Americans. It's no surprise that it also changed and shaped the way Americans thought. The Gilded Age challenged existing social ideals and added new theories that became popular among the population. Three new philosophies appeared during this era: Puritan work ethic, social Darwinism, and social gospel.
The Puritan work ethic emphasized hard work and frugality as a person's way to eternal salvation. The term was made by German sociologist Max Weber. The sociological theory was derived from Calvinism. Christians believed that hard work was required of themselves, and that diligence and rigorous labor would please God.
The philosophies were the beliefs, and one of them were Puritan work ethic, which was the theory that hard work and frugality are signs of a person's eternal salvation.
Social Darwinism was the theory that in a society, the strong would overcome the weak and gain power and influence. The theory derived from Charles Darwin's laws about natural selection. Social Darwinists applied these laws to the social, political, and economic domains of the human world. Wealthier Americans ended up using this ideology as a justification for not helping the poor, which resulted in the further widening of the gap between classes. The social gospel movement was a reform movement surrounding around the belief that churches should directly address economic and social problems. The movement sparked an effort among Protestant Christians to improve the economic, moral, and social conditions of the urban poor. Three organizations emerged from the social gospel movement: YMCA, the Children's Aid Society, and Salvation Army.
YMCA was founded by Sir George Williams in 1844 in response to the worsening of social conditions that resulted from the rise of urbanization. The organization brought unemployed men in need for jobs to cities. The Children's Aid Society was founded in 1853 by Charles Lowen Brace. It offered and allowed a place for the kids to take as residents. Salvation Army was founded in England in 1865 as a religious organization to preach salvation from sins to the poor people of London. Thieves, prostitutes, gamblers, and junkies were among Booth's first converts to Christianity. By 1874, the number of helpers had grown to 1,000 volunteers and 42 evangelists, all serving under the name the Christian Mission. As time passed by, Salvation Army turned into help for those who were in need.
The City Beautiful movement also appeared during this time. Flourishing between 1890s and the 1920s, the movement strived to enhance the city both visually and structurally. The movement worked on shaping the American urban landscape and improving the efficiency of the landscape. Advocates of this movement believed that beautification of the city would increase the quality of life. Frederick Olmsted, often referred to as the founder of American landscape, helped design many American public parks and became the leading landscape architect of the country after the Civil War. His biggest achievements include the creation of Central Park in New York, the U.S. Capitol grounds in Washington, D.C., and the Biltmore Estate ground in North Carolina. Roosevelt had the name father of skyscrapers. He was considered one of the most innovative architects, created a revolutionary form of the tall commercial office building. His first skyscraper, known as Monarch Building in Chicago, Roosevelt brought not only buildings and skyscrapers but a touch of modernism.
The Gilded Age was not only a boost to urbanization, but also immigration. Immigration is nothing new in the United States. It's divided into three categories: colonial immigration, old immigration, and new immigration. Colonial immigration started in the 1500s when Christopher Columbus founded the Americas, Britain, Spain, and French, then started to colonize the New World. Europeans immigrated to the United States for religious freedom and or to escape political and economic situations. African Americans didn't immigrate to the United States. They still made up a big part of the population due to the slave trade. In these years of colonization, the colonists faced the difficulties of climate change, disease, Native American attacks, and poor soil. During the old immigration, as historians have come to know it, the immigration to the United States had many factors. One of the many migrations were the Irish. The Irish suffered potato famine, looked to practice Catholicism, wished for land opportunity and jobs. Another of the big migration movements were made by the Germans, who seeked from political chaos and limit economic life and were encouraged to migrate because of the easy and cheap land. British and Scandinavian descent immigrated to the United States. Most immigrants that came spoke English. They were literate and Protestant or Jewish. A big pull factor by the United States was in 1849, known as the California Gold Rush, where thousands of miners traveled to Northern California after news reports of the discovery of gold at Sutter's Mill in January of 1848 had spread around the world. This caused Californians to apply for statehood in 1849.
As time passed by, the new immigration emerged. Occurring from 1870 to 1920, it was the second wave of immigrants from Southern, Central, and Eastern Europe. Europeans, Russian, Japanese, and Chinese immigrants relocated to the western coast. The immigrants congregated in ethnic urban neighborhoods where many native-born Americans responded with nativist views and anti-immigrant campaigns. Some of them introduced urban reforms to help immigrants assimilate. One of the biggest groups that migrated were the Jews, who escaped religious persecution in Europe. The main migrant locations were cities like Chinatown, Little Italy, Greektown. Most immigrants were Protestant except for the Irish, but they did not remain Protestant. The main religions were Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox.
As the population continued to increase, Americans used the West as a safety valve. The safety valve theory was the theory that people from the city could always fall back on the frontier if they were unsuccessful. If things didn't work out in the city, people would simply pack up and move west for a fresh start. But by 1890, the valve was gone. Americans had run out of more land to run to. There was no more frontier. Many opposed migrations, which created nativism. A nativist was those who favors the ones born in the country and opposes any immigrant. Hatred towards immigrants rose up and laws were made to keep them out. It was motivated by ethnic tensions and religious bias. The immigrants were considered as despots overthrowing the American Republic. They also bring anti-Catholic rights in competition from the low-paid immigrant workers for the belief that native-born Americans are superior to foreigners. Haters for immigrants was such a big deal that the Immigration Restriction League, a nativist group who wanted to restrict immigration into the United States to certain groups they deemed desirable, believed that immigrants should be screened through lyric tests and other standards designed to separate the desirable from the undesirable. One of the first being the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1882, where the federal legislation prohibited Chinese immigration to the United States. This law was the first major legal restriction in the United States history. Unfortunately, the new immigration, as we call it, brought poorer and less educated people than the old immigration. The act was officially signed into law on May 6, 1882 by President Chester Arthur. It effectively halted Chinese immigration for 10 years and prohibited Chinese from becoming U.S. citizens. In 1885, Congress banned the importation of foreign workers under contract. They were usually contracted for substandard wages. The literacy test officially began in 1917.
The Know Nothing Party was created during the mid-1850s, which consisted of an American political party that operated on a national basis. The movement began in response to an influx of migrants and promised to purify American politics by limiting or ending the influence of Irish Catholics and other immigrants that reflected nativist and anti-Catholic sentiment. It was empowered by popular fears that the country was being overwhelmed by German and Irish Catholic immigrants, who they saw as hostile to Republican values and as being controlled by the Pope in Rome. Mainly active from 1854 to 1856, the movement strove to immigration and naturalization, but met with little success. The membership was limited to Protestant men. There were few prominent leaders, and the largely middle-class membership was fragmented over the issue of slavery. The Know Nothing Party affected since it helped very well that year in state and local elections, and with passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, it won additional adherents from the ranks of conservatives who could support neither the pro-slavery Democrats nor anti-slavery Republicans. When Congress assembled on December 3, 1855, 43 representatives were avowed members of the Know Nothing Party.
In 1924, a little after World War I was over, a new immigration law was placed. It was known as the Immigration Act of 1924, when the immigration of Europeans changed from 3% to 2%, and the year changed from 1910 to 1890, which was favorable to Northern Europeans than to Southern and Eastern, absolutely against Japanese. The Japanese weren't the only ones to suffer discrimination. Even though Catholicism was the most popular religion of the United States at the time, they also faced discrimination because many didn't adopt to the new ideas and beliefs brought over. The National Origin Act of 1924 restricted the immigration of Southern and Eastern Europeans and practically excluded Asians and other non-whites from entry into the United States. The act instituted admission quotas by using the 1890 census to determine the population of a particular nationality group. The government then only allowed 2% of that population into the nation. In addition, the act completely barred immigration for all those whom the Supreme Court prohibited from obtaining U.S. citizenship, especially Asians. The National Origin Act drastically lowered the annual quota of immigration from 358,000 to 164,000. Congress abolished the national origins quota system in the 1960s. However, not all was bad for immigrants. Immigrants were able to assimilate themselves to America, as illustrated by the melting pot theory that appeared during this time. The melting pot is a metaphor for a heterogeneous society becoming more homogeneous. The different elements melting together into a harmonious whole with a common culture. It is particularly used to describe the assimilation of immigrants to the United States.
On a related note, the soluble theory claims that there are times when newly arrived immigrants do not lose the unique aspects of their cultures like the melting pot model states, but instead retain their special cultural qualities. According to this metaphor, the unique characteristics of each culture are still identifiable within the larger American society, much like the ingredients in a salad are still identifiable, yet contribute to the overall makeup of the salad bowl. And this theory, that also accounts for the retention of something American, hypertension when identifying cultural identity. This theory is also referred to as pluralism.